We've been talking a lot about Power Apps Code Apps on our channel lately. One thing we haven't dived into yet is the actual architecture of Code Apps and why it's important that you understand what it actually is. So in today's episode, we're going to walk you through that, and hopefully you'll leave having a better understanding as to how Code Apps are architected and why they're not actually that scary.
So Josh, how do Canvas apps compare to Code apps?
It's an interesting point because we've been in Canvas app world for a very long time and we've never really had to worry about what's under the hood. Not really. We've just had at a high level 3 things to kind of worry about. And that's our visual editor, the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, drag and drop experience that we've known to love and maybe hate a little bit throughout the years. Enriched with Power Effects formulas, which is our kind of expression language to make everything pixel perfect for things like writing data to servers, retrieving data, that kind of thing. And then enriching that experience with the connectors. So that's being able to get data from Microsoft 365 or SQL Server or some kind of third-party custom application. So that's all been bundled for us in a very low-code manner. Code apps aren't that. Code apps are a lot more under the hood. So, Charles, what about the code app side then? What does that look like?
Yeah, so with Code apps, instead of that visual editor, we get to build the code that goes beneath that visual editor. So we get to design the interface without the studio. So that's our equivalent there. We're writing our visual side in code. And then the next part where on the Canvas side, you have the Power FX, which is communicating with your connectors. On the Code App side, we have the Power Apps SDK, which is basically a package that helps us to communicate from our code with the connectors. And then on the connector side, it's exactly the same. We get to use the same connectors.
So there's a lot of crossover really when we start to kind of dig into it. It's just the layers of abstraction that's slightly different, isn't it? So when we actually start kind of lifting the hood up here in Code Apps and diving a bit deeper, the first thing we'll see on this diagram that we've got here is the web application. Now, this is the bit that you see when you actually run a code app. This runs locally in your browser, the compiled code. This is all of the front end goodness and application logic, using the HTML, using JavaScript frameworks if you want to, and any kind of, business logic, event handling, all of that kind of stuff. And that was our Canvas app editor in Canvas app world. So you can think of it kind of similar to that with your Power Effects formulas, all of that kind of stuff. But there is these additional layers, which, Charles, can you explain what's a Power Apps SDK? What's Power Platform Services? I don't know any of this. Help me out.
Okay, let's jump straight over to the Power Platform Services on the other side. So this is where Microsoft are providing Power Platform to us. And what are they providing? Well, the same things that they provide with Canvas apps. So they're providing hosting, authentication, so you don't need to worry about coding up some way for people to log in. It's just there by default. They're providing us with all of the Power Platform connectors and, of course, Dataverse. So the environment and the Dataverse tables, relationships, security roles, all of that stuff. That's the service that Microsoft provides. And that's the service that we want to access from our web application that you were talking about. The way to get to that is through that green bridge that we're looking at, which is the Power Apps SDK. And the Power Apps SDK is a package that we install. It's a node package. So it's when you're installing NPM something, that's your node package manager. And it's essentially a package of files. And those files tell our app how to communicate with the Power Platform service. But also we can run some commands using that Power Apps SDK to say, I want to add a connector, say a Dataverse table to my app. So Power Platform, please, can you tell me what it looks like? And then that's where the Power Platform service provides that data to the SDK, so those generated models and services that we see in the middle, and brings it through as files to our web application. And then our web application can use those files because then it has an understanding as to what the models and the services look like. We'll go into more detail on models and services another time.
Yeah, definitely. And the way I'm looking at this then is the SDK, the Power Apps SDK is almost like the translator between the two. It's connecting the dots, making sure that everything can communicate in a a proper way. So a couple of points I want to pick up on here, because we've had a bit of questioning, a few myths kind of come up in the comments and on some of our social feeds lately. And that is code apps can't be governed. They're not covered under governance, and code apps can't use SharePoint as a connector. But what I'm seeing here is a complete opposite. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, you're understanding that correctly. So all of the governance that applies to Canvas apps applies to code apps as well. And then in addition to that, when it comes to the connectors, generally we can use basically the same kind of things. But at the moment, and this is only a temporary thing, there are some limitations with those connections. So we can use a SharePoint list, no problem with that. But with SharePoint document libraries, we can't send and receive files at the moment. But that's going to be addressed within weeks. So if you're watching this a few weeks in the future, it's probably already done.
Moving on to the development and deployment kind of life cycle then. So it's not really too dissimilar to what I'm used to in Canvas apps, really. And what we're seeing here is, rather than using Power Effects, I'm just writing my code, or I'm using AI assistants to write my code. I'm running a few commands using, Pack CLI at the moment, to add my connectors to get, data that I need and interactions with any third-party services or first-party services. If it's Microsoft, I'm then running the server and dev to make sure that I can see what's happening, making sure it looks like it's doing what I want it to do. And that's, using an npm run dev. And then once I'm happy with that, we run the build using, again, some more commands and publish it to Power Platform. That makes it available in, Power Platform, so we can run it like a normal Canvas app or model driven app. And then we just share it and job done. So actually, when you break it down like that, it's really not that different to what we were doing in Canvas apps, really, was it? Just rather than button clicks and click ops, we're just typing a few terminal commands. We've kind of gone a bit full circle with the terminal, but it's all good. I feel like it's quite an easy workflow to understand.
Yeah, and it's going to get easier because, like, we're showing on the screen at the moment pack code for different things because that's still in the documentation at the moment for code apps. That's going to be changing to npx power apps, which means that we don't need the pack CLI as a prerequisite anymore. So it doesn't need to be installed, which is one less thing that needs to be done in order to get into this. But in addition to that, that's still running commands. And the way that the whole industry is going is towards making all of this kind of thing easier for people. So making writing code easier, but making the whole development experience easier. So you can just expect all of this to get easier and easier. And Microsoft are working on vibe.powerapps.com. We'll wait and see what that turns into this year because that's going to have some major changes. But vibe.powerapps.com is using the same technology as we're showing you here. So that's your citizen developer experience or your non-technical experience. This is your experience, which is a bit more technical, but still absolutely achievable for people who don't know how to write code.
Yeah. And with the explosion of vibe coding, AI assisted development, all of this gets abstracted by your AI tooling, which means that you don't actually need to know any of this. It will know it and it will help you through it. So actually, it's not a low code experience anymore. It's a no code experience, which is so powerful and accessible to the masses, which is great. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what gets built on code apps as it becomes even more popular in the future.
And yeah, the final point on this is that it's what we're doing with code apps is we're removing those limitations that you have with the Canvas app visual editor. So we're removing ClickOps and we're removing the restrictions on CSS and HTML, the restrictions on being able to animate and things like that. All of that's gone. Now we can do all of those things because we have code apps.
Yeah, really putting the nail in the coffin for Canvas apps, I feel. Anyway, let's move on swiftly. We wanted to actually show what actually gets generated when you scaffold a code app. So when you run all these commands, there's lots of things that happen and it can feel quite daunting or scary. But actually, when you just take a minute to see what these files are, it's really not that bad. So, Charles, I'm not a coder, I'm not a developer. This is completely alien to me. Where do I start when I see all of this?
Yeah, it does look really intimidating because you get tons of files and folders on the left-hand side, and you're just thinking, I have no idea what these things mean. what we've tried to do is we've tried to make it simpler. We've tried to break it down so that it's not something that's as worrying as it might seem at first. So what we've done here is this is a Power Apps code app that we've created, and we've stripped back all of the JavaScript framework stuff. This is not using a JavaScript framework now. So this is as simple as it can be. So this is an HTML page. And what you can see here is that we've got HTML tags, we've got head tags, which is where you put all of your header information, like we're calling this blank JS, so it's a blank JavaScript one. And then we have a body tag, and whatever's in the body is what gets displayed in the browser. So then within here, we've got a div tag, and that div tag has an ID of app. Now that's really relevant because what we're doing next is we're saying use this JavaScript. So use this JavaScript in our source folder. So let's go over to that file, that main.ts, so .ts being TypeScript. And then within here, we're creating a constant that's called app. And we're using some JavaScript here to get look into the document, which is our web page, and get the element by the ID, which is app. So if we go back to that, we can see that that's the app. So we're finding that div. And then we're using JavaScript again to insert some HTML for that div. So that whole concept is what JavaScript frameworks are doing. They're injecting code, injecting HTML, injecting CSS maybe, injecting it into the page to make it dynamic and to populate it with whatever it needs to be populated with. So then what that results in is that you get this hello world example. So this is our Power Apps code app.
That is easily changed if you wanted to now change that to Hello World 1 or something like that. It would just, it's as simple as that. That's the foundations of it. We've really stripped back what gets kind of scaffolded to a basic app. So you can see it's actually not that scary underneath the hood. All of the bolt-ons and stuff, that's what makes things look nice. That's what makes things more performant. That's the JavaScript frameworks coming into place. When you remove all of that, you get this kind of real simple scaled back architecture, which is really good to see. So there's like the source folder is where all the magic happens in terms of what you're going to see and all the logic. That's not the only one, though, is it, that we need to worry about? There's some other folders and files we need to just take note of. What are they?
Yeah, as we've talked about, there are tons of different folders and files. So like Josh said, your source code goes in the source folder. So that's your place where you're going to be working on all of your code. There are also some other folders that you get given, things like distribution folder, which is where when you build your app, so you do the npm run build, that builds everything and puts it all together inside that distribution folder, which is what ultimately gets sent to Power Apps. And then you've got things like node modules. So that's where all of your npm packages get put into. You don't touch that. Of course, you don't touch a distribution folder either. You've got different settings files. You don't have to worry about them until you need to actually interact with them. There's a TypeScript cache. Don't worry about that. So then there are these files here that we should pay a little bit of attention to. So there's a package.json. So it's a JSON file. So that's a type of information inside it. And this will say what all of your dependencies are. So because we're not using something like React, we don't have React listed here. It's much simpler. It's a very small file, but we are using things like TypeScript and we are using Microsoft Power Apps. So those things are within here. And then we also have the power config JSON, which is all about the configuration for our Power Apps code app. Again, a file that you do not touch, not unless you absolutely have to for some reason. And then we've got tsconfig. So this is our TypeScript config, and then some compiler settings and some dev settings. We don't really need to worry about these things. It all really goes like there are lots of things that look really complicated, but we only need to focus on a couple of things, like basically our source directory.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note as well that it can be scary and daunting when you get started with this, but you very quickly adapt. I remember getting started with Canvas apps. I felt exactly the same, completely out of my depth, and then very quickly got used to it. And it's the same here, right? Much felt my depth initially, but yeah, I'm starting to feel at home with this stuff now. It's really quite straightforward once you get into it. And what we'll do is we'll include all of this stuff as well in the video description below, so that you can reference this and the architecture, so it can help you get going just a little bit more quicker. And then that way, then there's not that big, massive kind of fear factor when you're kind of starting a new code app. It's important to understand as well that, not all of this is going to make sense, but if there's anything that you're unsure of, if you've got any questions, do let us know in the comments below. We're always trying to reply as quickly and as meaningfully as we can. Again, do leave feedback as well, because that really does mean a lot to us, positive and negative. It helps us make these videos better and more for you, our viewers. Until next time, hope you enjoyed this, and it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from Charles.